Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I signed the contract on a Tuesday afternoon in Albuquerque. The kind of dry heat where even the air feels like it is road-tested. The paperwork had a government letterhead that never spelled out the agency, only an office number and a return address that traced back to a post office box in Santa Fe. The job title read Protective Security Specialist 2. The pay was better than anything I had seen since my last deployment ended, plus housing and a per diem that hinted at isolation. At the final page, the clause that mattered was written in careful, plain language. I was to obey all posted instructions, observe all verbal orders, and never discuss what I saw with anyone. I had worked municipal security contracts and corporate access control out in Phoenix. I had done night shifts at distribution centers and medical labs. I thought I understood cameras and card readers and complaining supervisors. What drew me in wasn't the money, not entirely. It was the sentence the interviewer let slip when he thought I would not notice. Our holding spaces are different. He did not say inmates. He did not say subjects. He said holding spaces, like the rooms were puzzles and not cells. 3 days later, I met the convoy at a small airfield in Socorro before dawn. The sun was just a red rim behind the Magdalena Mountains. 2 sport utility vehicles in dull gray paint idled beside a cargo van with no markings. The driver handed me a duffel bag with clothing issued in earth tones, a hard plastic case containing a headset radio, and a laminated sheet of emergency codes. My name patch for the uniform just said Shaw. The lead asked if I had eaten. I nodded. He did not smile. We drove south along United States Route 380, past the signs for the very large array that tourists photograph from the shoulder. We did not turn off. We kept going until the highway stretched into flat horizon and the land looked like a sheet of sand and scrub pinned down by a few dark mesas. Around late morning, we diverted onto a service road that was not on the public maps and rolled behind a low ridge that hid a rectangle of concrete and chain link. It looked like a remote water treatment plant. Cylindrical tanks, a squat cinder block building, a tall whip antenna, and a faded sign that read Southwest Water Improvement District. Inside, the building smelled like fresh paint and disinfectant. A woman with her hair tight in a bun met us at a man trap. 2 doors, interlocked so only one could open at a time, guarded by an armed officer standing at parade rest. She introduced herself as Captain Rivera. She scanned my photo identification card, checked my face against the camera feed, and handed me a new card with a metal strip that caught the light. Wear it on your outermost layer, upper chest, left side, she said. If it is ever not on you, you do not move. If an officer tells you to freeze, you freeze. No jokes, no excuses. Past the man trap, we stepped into an elevator cab big enough to hold a pickup truck. The panel only had 3 buttons. G for ground, L, 1 for level -1, and L, 2 for level -2. Rivera turned a physical key in a lock next to the panel and used her card and a thumbprint to enable the lower button. The elevator hummed and sank. My ears popped. I had the sudden sensation of entering a place built to be forgotten. Level -1 was the operations floor. The hallway floors were polished epoxy in a muted gray. The walls were white with a subtle dotted texture to kill echoes. Signs in block letters marked out Sector Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. Doors had small panes of thick glass with wire mesh. Handrails were painted safety yellow. People moved with purpose. I saw a control room with a wall of screens, a bank of servers with blue status lights, and a windowed room where 2 technicians monitored a pair of diesel generators through digital panels that showed coolant temperature, oil pressure, and load in kilowatts. I recognized the brand. Cummins. There were 2 large, uninterruptible power supplies on the opposite wall, each with its own battery array housed in metal cabinets. Rivera guided me through a quick orientation that did not feel quick. She showed me the armory. Clean, inventory tagged, with small arms and locked racks, and an emphasis on non-penetrating ammunition for indoor use. She used exact language. Carbines were issued with frangible rounds to reduce risk of ricochet and wall penetration. Shotguns carried breaching cartridges in a separate bandolier, clearly labeled. There were tasers with spare cartridges, collapsible batons, and pepper spray locked in individual canisters with audit seals. If force had to be used, it had to be justified, documented, and as minimal as possible. My radio call sign was Sierra 2. Supervisors used alphabetic call signs based on post. The control room was base. The facility was officially the Southwest Research Detention Annex, though no one said that out loud. On paper, this location was an annex to something bigger, somewhere else. Rivera did not show me the cells on my first day. She ended the tour at a door labeled Policy, handed me a heavy binder with laminated pages, and made me read it at a metal table while she watched. The rules were exact. Never speak to a detainee unless ordered and accompanied. Never turn your back on any occupied cell. Never enter a cell without the officer of the watch physically present. Never take anything offered across the threshold. Never accept verbal bargains. Never allow a detainee to begin a sentence with your first name. Never answer a question about the time or the weather. Never confirm the presence or identity of other detainees. If a detainee claimed to be someone from your past, you were to refer them to policy and call it in. If you heard a voice that said it was coming from the vents, you were to assume the public address system had been compromised and use hand signals until the channel was verified. On my second day, I walked the detention levels. Level -2 was where we kept them. The elevator transition was controlled by 2 officers and a scanner that read the metal in your badge and matched it to your biometric. The heavy door at the end of the corridor had a wheel you turned to seal it like a submarine hatch, even though I knew the air pressure on both sides was the same. The designers wanted the officers to feel the step, to understand the line they were crossing. The cells were arranged in 4 pods, each holding 6 rooms: Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta. The rooms were not bars and concrete. They were climate-controlled boxes with negative pressure and glass that had the blued reflection of something denser than regular laminate. Every cell had its own air-handling unit, monitored by the building automation system from a control terminal outside the pod. Each had a sound masking emitter mounted high, silently producing a wash that made whispers hard to locate. Almost all had Faraday shielding built into the walls. In Alpha, I saw the closest thing to a regular detainee. Unit A3 contained a man in his 50s, neat beard, hair shaved short, wearing soft uniform clothing like the ones in medical wards. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, staring at his hands as if reading them. The placard affirmed human origin, with notes about enhanced resilience and abnormal healing. I watched him press his palm to the glass and leave no print. My mind told me to file it away and not stare. A5 was dark until the supervisor told the system to increase brightness. The return camera showed something perched in the corner near the ceiling, hugging the junction like it did not trust gravity. The outline did not match any animal I could name. The note on the terminal said, "Avoid direct reflection. Avoid eye contact, limit dwell time." I did as instructed. In Bravo, there was a room that was never entirely empty. B1 had no presence in it that I could see, but microphones registered a constant low-band whisper like wind moving through a pipe. The placard warned, "Do not acknowledge speech." Do not repeat words heard. Do not answer. I stood there with my hands on the rail and pretended to be a statue while words rolled up inside my hearing like the sound of someone talking in the next room. When I stepped back, my shoulders realized how tense they had been. C2 held a detainee who never breathed. That was literally on the medical tablet. No respiratory motion. Stable pulse. He, or it, lay on a bed, eyes open, hands on his chest, motionless, with a monitoring clip on his finger that mapped a constant series of pulses like a metronome. The clinicians explained later that metabolism did not show up in the usual way, but electrical activity in the heart did. His skin looked like it had never been outdoors. I made a habit of checking the monitors without looking him in the face. The last pod, Delta, was the one the officers mentioned in a particular tone, the way professionals talk about a steep stretch of road. The doors into Delta were thicker. The cameras had 4 lenses, not 2. The door handle was color-coded red against the otherwise neutral palette. This was where we kept detainees that did not fit well into the categories. The ones that made observations about the guard rotations without ever appearing near the glass. The ones that asked for a book they could not have known we had. The ones who used names. Training included a drill on simulated failures. The facility would switch to emergency lighting while the control room cut certain doors and required manual resets. We would run the checklist, verify that the power transferred to batteries and then to generators, confirm that negative pressure was maintained, and that the airlocks were sealed. The drill was designed to be boring. Boring drills kept people alive. We ran the drill twice in my first week. Both times the system chimed and the cameras switched to a low-light mode and we moved through the steps like we had practiced for a month. I adjusted to the rhythm. My shift was evenings into nights, starting at 4 p.m. and ending at midnight, which meant I often handed off to the graveyard crew. Nights on level -2 had a sound I came to know. The quiet hum of the ventilation, the soft beeps of monitors, and your own footsteps bouncing back from the walls. The food for detainees arrived in sealed trays with labels that were bland and exact. Calories, protein, and no spices that could cause reactions. Detainee interaction was one way. We slid the tray into a small transfer vestibule built into the wall, closed one door, waited for a green light, then opened the interior flap remotely. Hands never touched. In the second week, I was assigned a longer patrol. The other guard on my team that night was Pagano, a former county deputy from Colorado who had the calm habit of a person who had once responded to calls alone and 30 minutes from backup. He knew the facility, knew which crews of maintenance technicians were friendly, and which preferred not to make eye contact with security. He showed me the emergency egress routes that did not appear on the standard map. He also showed me the breaker cabinets for the pods, the physical overrides for the electronic locks, and the manual air dampers that could isolate a cell if the automation stopped responding. People like to imagine that secret places are messy or glamorous. This place was neither. It was clean, and it was ordinary in the way only well-maintained infrastructure can be. The floors were mopped. The stainless steel was polished. The camera lenses were dusted. The generator room was checked at scheduled times with checklists signed in ink. We logged the checks on paper in a binder and digitally in a system that time-stamped every entry. It was a place that trusted nothing entirely. Not computers, not people, and definitely not the things behind the glass. The breach did not start with alarms. It started with the sky. All day, a line of storms had been building over the San Andres Mountains, moving east across the Tularosa Basin. By sunset, weather alerts crackled on the local radio frequencies with reports of a severe dust storm, sustained winds, visibility near zero, and static that fuzzed out broadcasts. The facility had storm shutters for the ground-level building, mostly to keep sand from scouring the exterior cameras and to protect the generator's air intakes. By 9:30 p.m., the outside feeds were a brown blur. At 10:11 p.m., the first electrical flicker hit. Every light dimmed and recovered. The control room operator said, "Base to all posts, we are transferring to generator power. Stand by," in the calm voice of someone reading a weather report. The lights steadied. The generators engaged with a low, steady drone. The building automation system showed green across the power tree. Everyone relaxed a little. We had drilled for this. At 10:18 p.m., a second sag came, heavier, like a hand pressing down. The uninterruptible power supplies clicked. One held, the other through a fault. The control room operator said, "Base to maintenance, I have a fault on UPS 2, battery cabinet B. Please advise," and got only static for a beat before maintenance answered back with a broken transmission about heat and an access panel that would not latch. On my handheld radio, there was a soft click that did not belong to our channel, like another line had joined the conversation and then backed away. At 10:20 p.m., the facility decided it was on fire, even though it was not. Somewhere down in the bowels, a smoke detector went into alarm, maybe from dust pulled through a gap, maybe from hot air pooling near a panel. The fire control logic dumped certain doors to fail-safe states and began to cycle dampers to purge. Negative pressure in Delta dipped for 3 seconds, long enough to make the line on the screen wobble red before it recovered. The control room slammed the system into manual override, but the software fought back because it was certain it was saving us. Automation does not like to be told it is wrong. Rivera stepped into the control room and took command with 2 words and a card swipe. "We go to manual," she said. "Pagano, Shaw, you are with me. Helm, keep Alpha and Bravo stable. Delaney, put human eyes on the generator room. Everyone else, hold." The emergency lighting cut brighter. The hum of the building changed pitch as if the whole place had taken a breath. We clipped on headlamps, though we hoped not to need them. I felt the edge of my baton at my hip and the radio press against my shoulder. We took the east corridor toward the power distribution room. The facility layout made practical sense. The generators were closer to the freight elevator, the batteries in a room with concrete walls, the breaker cabinets set out so a person could physically pull and lock them. The first minor warning came when the speakers overhead emitted a brief burst of white noise, and then a sentence in a voice I did not know, saying a string of numbers like a child reciting. The sentence stopped midstream when Rivera killed the local public address circuit with a switch by the door. In the generator room, heat pushed at us like an open oven. The status panels showed both units online, load sharing, coolant at the edge of the normal band. Delaney, maintenance tech, tall, with a ball cap damp at the rim, had already propped open the side door to let heat escape. He had a laser thermometer and was logging readings in a small notebook while his tablet refused to reconnect to the network. He reported that one uninterruptible power supply had gone offline, but the other was carrying the critical systems. We would have to reroute some loads to keep the more sensitive parts alive. Rivera assigned Pagano to stay with Delaney and keep the temperatures in check while she and I went to the Delta pod breakers. "Remember the rule," she said softly as we walked. "If you hear anything on the internal speakers that uses your first name, you do not answer. If a detainee asks for the time, you do not answer. If you see a door open that should not be open, you call it in and you do not cross the threshold." I nodded, and she gave me a look that said nodding was not enough. "Repeat it back." If I hear my first name, I do not answer. If I'm asked for the time, I do not answer. If a door is open that should not be, I call it in and I do not cross. Delta, sat behind a short dogleg in the corridor that suppressed direct lines of sight. The red strip on the doorframe glowed in the emergency light. The glass above the control terminal reflected our headlamps like a pair of pale moons. The terminal showed normal on 3 of the 6 cells, and a yellow triangle on D2. Pressure variance, the text read. The door indicator for D2 was green when it should have been blue. Green meant unlocked. We did not open the pod. We followed procedure. Rivera keyed her radio. Base, this is Captain Rivera at Delta Control. I have an unexpected green indicator on D2. Negative pressure alert 1. Initiating remote camera check and status ping. The pod camera returned a low-light view of 6 doors, each with a small viewing panel set at eye level. No movement. The environmental numbers scrolled in the lower right corner. Temperature stable, air exchange low, pressure reading cycling. The camera inside D2 showed a room with a bed and a chair and a stainless table. The chair was empty, the bed was made too neatly, and the antenna on the monitoring unit was bent as if a hand had pressed it. The speaker inside the pod popped once, and then found a voice that was not from our side. It was a woman's voice, calm and conversational. "It's all right," it said. "I am where I am supposed to be. You can put the lock back." The voice did not echo. It had the flat sound of a small room. The terminal showed input on the pod microphone even though the mute indicator was lit. Rivera did not respond. She tapped the local breaker cabinet with her knuckle, called up the wiring diagram on the terminal, and looked at the label for D2, sound. The breaker for sound isolation was in the on position. She looked at me and lifted her eyebrows slightly. It was a question that was not a question. Would I pull it? I nodded. She put her hand around my wrist, not hard, just a pressure to get my attention. 3 steps, she whispered. 1, announce. 2, pull. 3, verify. I keyed my radio. Base, Sierra 2, we are isolating sound to Delta Pod, cell D2, pulling breaker S Delta 2. The control room acknowledged with a click and a copy. I took the small lockout key from my belt, turned it in the padlock that held the breaker guard, pulled the guard away, and flipped the switch down. The indicator on the screen cut to red. The speaker went quiet. The hair on my arms relaxed. I reinstalled the guard and locked it, tugged to confirm, and read the label aloud for the record. Rivera nodded. Procedure was a language you spoke to reassure your own head. Door, Rivera said, pointing to the next breaker. We will reassert power to the magnetic lock and command a relatch. She made me say the words. I made the call. The breaker switched. The door indicator on the terminal flickered from green to blue, then back to green. The relatch command failed. The system offered a series of reasons. The top one was the one you never want. Local override from within cell. That was impossible by design. Camera again, Rivera said. The inside view showed the same neat bed, the same empty chair, the same small table, and an additional item that made my chest go tight. A keycard lay on the tabletop on top of the blank log sheet, as if someone had placed it precisely for the camera to see. The color matched our badges. The small metal strip caught our headlamps even through the screen. The word printed across the lower edge was my last name. I swallowed. I checked my badge reflexively, top left of my chest, where it was supposed to be. It was there. The number matched the one I had memorized. The image on the screen was a keycard with my name that I had not lost. I felt my face go hot, then cold. Ignore it, Rivera said, voice even. Record it. Do not acknowledge it. We backed away from the terminal and stepped into the small alcove by the pod door where the intercom panel lived. A sheet of laminated instructions hung like a prayer. If the door will not relatch, secure the corridor, isolate air, and wait for supervisory authorization. Rivera used the override key to engage the corridor dampers. The air moved across the back of my neck. I pictured the air diagram in my training: pods, cells, corridor, and the big return that sent everything through a high-efficiency particulate filter and an ultraviolet light bank designed to kill what filters missed. The control room called. "Captain, we are seeing interference on multiple microphones. Bravo 1 has started to repeat phrases that our operator did not speak. The generators are holding, but one of the outside temperature sensors just spiked to 130 degrees Fahrenheit and then fell to 60 in a single second. We believe dust is blocking the housing." "Copy," Rivera said. "We will remain at Delta. Pagano, status." Pagano came back short of breath. The generator room temperatures had risen again. He had Delaney and a second tech running a portable air mover aimed at the intake filters. He said a panel had blown open and sand had whipped across the room. They had slapped it back and taped it, but grit was now on the floor. Nothing they could not sweep and vacuum later. For now, the lights stayed on. The voice from D2 returned, quiet and conversational, but this time it did not come from the pod speakers. It came from the ventilation duct above our heads. I heard it because I was standing under the register. Rivera heard it because she froze, and her head tilted in a way that you cannot fake. "You brought me my badge," the voice said, exact and plain, with my intonation, my pauses, like someone had played back a recording of me from earlier in the day and edited the words. "Thank you." I took one step sideways, away from the duct, like a person moving out of rain. Rivera pointed to the wall switch and I understood. Kill the nearby speaker circuits entirely. I cut the power to the section. The duct went silent. My heart beat where I could hear it in my teeth. My training shouted at me like a coach, "You are okay, you are hearing a reproduction, do not make it personal." I felt the pull to open the pod, not because I wanted to disobey, but because the situation had been arranged to make the bypass feel like the only sane thing to do. The lock was green. The control room was already busy with generators and dust. The voice had moved to our vents. There was a keycard on the table with my name. The trick of the place was the pressure it applied to common sense. It was designed to make your hands pick convenience over instructions. Rivera leaned close. "We do this by the book," she said. "We will not write our names into the incident report as the people who broke a seal without a reason that could be defended to a jury." Then she did something that was not in the book. She slipped a small orange earplug into my palm. "If you hear something that knows your voice, put these in. Not because it will stop it, because it will remind you that you have a choice." We called for a maintenance escort to bring a mechanical brace for the pod door, so that even if the lock read green, the door could not be pulled open from the inside if someone tried. While we waited, we conducted a visual check of the other cells. D1's camera showed a bare floor. D3 showed a wall. D4 was slightly fogged, condensation on the lens from an air-handling variance, but the thermal overlay showed a heat source low to the ground, like a person crouching. D6 showed the ceiling, as if the camera had been tilted somehow from within a sealed housing that was not supposed to tilt. When maintenance arrived with the brace, we configured it together. It was a heavy steel device that spanned the door and anchored into the frame with expanding pins. It was ugly, and it worked. Once it was in place, you would need a hydraulic spreader to pull the door. The indicator stayed green. The brace made it irrelevant. I logged the installation in the incident record with the timestamp. Rivera initialed it with a neat R. We were walking back toward the control room when the main lights flickered twice and then cut. Emergency lights took over. The shift from constant brightness to the slightly colder hue of the emergency fixtures changed the corridor into a place that remembered being a corridor but had forgotten the details. Our headlamps painted rectangles on the walls. The radio hissed with a burst of static that sounded like breathing. Then everything on the speakers went silent. "Base, Sierra 2, I said. "I have lost public address audio. Please confirm." Nothing came back. I tried again. Still nothing. Rivera elevated her radio to her mouth and called on the secondary channel. Pagano answered immediately. "We are good in the generator room," he said. "But the control room just told me they are losing camera feeds one at a time. They still have power. They still have logs. They just cannot see. They asked me to tell anyone I run into to keep moving but to slow down before corners. They are worried about doors." We continued toward the control room. The corridor whispered with the soft friction of our uniforms. My headlamp beam caught small details. A scuff mark on the wall at knee height, a single grain of sand rolling like a ball bearing. I kept my baton in my hand because it felt better to have something with weight than to only hold a flashlight. Rivera carried her flashlight underhand, as if she had trained for that grip, and kept her other hand free. At the turn by Bravo, the air changed, cooler by a few degrees. The display panel outside the pod showed a mute icon over the speakers, and the environmental values stayed green. We were 20 feet from the door when someone inside spoke in a voice that sounded like my mother. It was exactly right, the pitch, the careful way she pronounced my name when she was trying to calm me, and the little laugh in the throat at the end when she was not sure if she had been understood. "You left your jacket," the voice said. "It will be cold when you come out." My head tried to pull me sideways toward the door, with a reflex older than training. I pressed the earplug into my left ear and felt the dull pressure cut the room in half. I put the other plug in. The voice became a sound without words. Rivera watched my hands and nodded once. She did not ask me if I was all right. She did not slow down. When we reached the control room, the door was open because the automatic closer had failed. Inside, the wall of monitors showed empty rooms, frozen frames, or gray with the words "Signal Lost" in the corner. 2 operators were at the consoles, their hands on the keyboard and the manual log on the binder at the same time, writing what the system could not store. The air smelled faintly like warm plastic. The red trouble light pulsed. Rivera stepped behind the primary console and looked at the power tree. The generator output lines were still green. The batteries had stopped charging, which meant we were on a live balance. "What do we have?" she asked. "Communications are intermittent," the senior operator said. "Cameras are dropping at random. Speaker circuits are unreliable. The fire system insists there is smoke in the south cable chase, but we have no heat reported there. The detention pods are holding. Delta reports your brace is in place." Rivera pointed to me. "Sierra 2, you are going to the south chase with me. We will take the hands-on kit and verify the alarm. Pagano, meet us at the junction. Delaney, leave 1 generator tech and join us with the cable tester." She turned to the operator. "Do not page us over the speakers. Radio only. If we are not back in 20 minutes, lock down the facility and follow the egress plan." She looked at me until I repeated the 20 minutes back to her. The hands-on kit was a rolling case with basic tools: a non-contact voltage tester, a thermal camera the size of a paperback book, an extendable mirror, a flashlight with a strobe we would not use, a small crowbar, cable ties, a lockout kit, and a sealant cartridge. I checked each piece while Rivera signed the kit out with the time. The radio clicked twice like someone in another room had done it on purpose. I told myself it was only dust. The south cable chase was a corridor behind a corridor, a space where the fat bundles of wire ran in neatly labeled trays, turn after turn like arteries in a person. The entry door required a key and a card and a code. We moved with careful speed, keeping the lights low to preserve our night sight because some sections of the chase had no emergency fixtures. 100 feet in, the smell changed from clean mechanical to a faint metal tang. At the first junction, we saw what had tripped the alarm. A small haze, not smoke so much as dust, so fine the suspended particles looked like fog in the beam of a headlamp. The thermal camera showed nothing above ambient. The non-contact sensor showed voltage present in the primary bundles, normal. The haze glittered and then fell when we shut the access hatch to the outside. Dust had come in during the panel failure Delaney had mentioned. The detector had been honest but unhelpful. We logged it as a nuisance alarm with cause identified. We were turning to leave when the radio made a sound like a person clearing their throat and then spoke. It used my voice, saying my call sign, then used Rivera's voice to answer, and then used Pagano's voice to cut in with a joke I had heard him make earlier in the week about coffee. The timing was wrong. The words were not as we had said them, but the timbre was perfect. Rivera put a finger to her lips and then carefully turned her radio off. She held up 3 fingers, counted down, and we both switched our radios on at the same moment to a different channel. "This is Captain Rivera on Channel 3, she said. "Authenticate Saguaro." "Authenticating Saguaro," came the operator's voice after a pause, using the challenge and response words from the back page of the binder. "Respond with rainwater." "Rainwater," Rivera said. We both breathed again. Authentication did not fix the voices, but it kept us from being shepherded by them. When we came back into the main corridor, the dust in the air was thicker than before, a fine brown veil that our headlamps made visible. The facility breathed differently. Airflow had shifted. We stepped past Bravo, and I kept my eyes ahead. From inside, a voice I recognized from a distant part of my life. My commanding officer on a hot day in southern Afghanistan said my last name and asked for a situation report. I did not look. I did not speak. I wanted to. I did not. Around the corner, a door stood ajar. I knew it did not belong because I had never seen it open. It was a personnel airlock leading to a sterile lab room we rarely used. The green light over the seal glowed. Rivera stopped where she was and went very still, like a person listening for water in the wall. Her hand went to the radio and she pressed the transmit button halfway so that it did not click. She let it down again. "Don't posture," she whispered. "Don't give it the shape it wants." She set her flashlight on the floor and angled it so the beam painted the space under the door. No shadow moved. She stepped to the side and inspected the hinge pins. They were intact. She examined the frame with the mirror to check the gap. No tampering. The indicator on the panel for the door controller showed the word "manual" in small letters, as if someone had turned a key on the inside. That was not a feature we offered to ourselves. We did not open the inner door. We closed the outer one. Rivera used the lockout kit, physically pinned the handle with a hasp, and signed a tag that said, "Do not operate." We stepped back in unison like dancers. Our radios stayed quiet. I heard the ventilation whisper through the diffusers. My breathing was loud in the earplugs. I took them out slowly to clear the cotton sensation. Rivera watched me do it and nodded as if I had passed a test. Back in the control room, the operator had drawn a rough map on paper showing which cameras had failed. The pattern was not random. The failures traced a path from Alpha to Bravo to Delta, skipping Charlie. If you connected the dots, it looked like someone walking, pausing, and walking again. Rivera stared at the map without speaking. Then she said, "What is in Charlie that would block this path?" Faraday shielding in C3 and C4, the operator said, and the air handling layout is different. The plenum returns are isolated. Good, Rivera said. That is our safe lane. We will move through Charlie, verify seals, and then go to Delta to relieve the brace. If the interference is traveling, it will have to move around the shielding. That gives us time. Pagano, meet us at Charlie entry. We are going to move carefully and we are not going to improvise. We crossed into Charlie and it felt like stepping into a clean room. The air was still and steady. The overhead speakers did not pop. The door indicators were a neat row of blue. The camera inside C2 showed the man who did not breathe, eyes open, hands folded. The monitor line marched across the screen. The wall clock in the pod, the only regular clock on level -2, showed 11:13 p.m. The time matched my wristwatch. Grounding detail, time matches. I said it out loud for the log. Rivera wrote it down. Pagano arrived with two things I did not expect: a small bag of zip ties and a folded towel. He handed me the towel. If you have to apply pressure to a door seam, use the towel so you don't leave skin oils, he said. It was practical and oddly comforting because it was the kind of advice you only get from someone who has been in a situation that required touching more than one door. We moved as a three-person wedge. At Delta, the brace sat exactly where we had installed it. The indicator for D2 was still green. The camera inside D2 showed the same neat bed, the same table, and the keycard with my name. Except now, there was a second keycard next to the first, printed with Rivera's last name. It was positioned so that our headlamps would catch the small metal strips and throw a line of light right at our eyes. Pagano breathed out through his nose. He did not speak. Rivera opened the maintenance panel next to the pod control terminal with her key. Inside, a row of physical switches mirrored the software ones on the screen. She toggled the pod microphones off at the hardware. The screen reflected the change after a brief delay. She then cut power to the small powered glass in the viewing ports. Without the power, they would automatically polarize so that the view would be one way from our side only. She did it cell by cell. When she reached D4, the screen flashed a warning. Local override. She cut the power anyway. The warning remained. We could no longer see into D4. The rules stated that was acceptable if it prevented interaction. Now the door, she said. Sierra 2, you are on the brace. Pagano, you monitor the corridor. I will attempt a re-engage of the maglock. I put my shoulder to the brace, not to muscle it, but to feel if the door moved. It did not. Pagano took a half step to position himself down the corridor. Rivera keyed the relatch and the indicator turned blue. The system chimed. The green cut to blue and held. The brace remained. I called the status to the control room. The operator read it back to me word for word, which was how I knew he was in control and not something using his voice. Rivera marked the time. The incident steadied a notch. For a minute, we believed the worst had plateaued. Then, down the corridor inside Delta, the light under D6 went dark, as if someone had blown out a candle. The system did not show a change. The indicator remained blue. The camera feed, which had shown the ceiling, cut to gray. The public address speaker in the pod, which should have been off, crackled, and a voice that I recognized as my own spoke a single word in a tone of surprise. Please. My mouth went dry. I knew that word because I had used that tone once when I was 19 and standing in a barracks stairwell, asking a friend not to leave. It had no place here. Rivera looked at me, and I looked back, and neither of us had to say that we were at a line the manual did not draw. We will not open anything, Rivera said quietly. We will account for everything. She pointed to the small cutout in the wall above the pod door where a diagnostic port lived. Sierra 2, plug in the tester. Tell me if the lock is actually energized or only pretending. I clipped the small tester box to the port and watched the lights. The lock read as powered and engaged. The door was mechanically sealed. Whatever had made D6 dark had not changed the lock's state. I gave the reading aloud, making my voice as steady as I could. Pagano kept his gaze a few degrees off the door like a hunter pretending not to see a deer while it was deciding whether to bolt. Rivera made a decision. We will take Delta offline from the main grid and put it on the isolated bus from Generator 2, she said. We will accept darkness in the pod over interference that we cannot explain. Pagano, you will stay in the corridor outside Delta and watch the brace. Shaw, you will come with me to the power distribution room. We will do this without the computer's permission if it will not give it. In the distribution room, the heat had dropped a few degrees thanks to the portable air mover. Delaney had chalked numbers next to panels as a quick reference. I recognized his handwriting from earlier, tidy and all caps. He handed me a pair of gloves and pointed to the bus bar for Delta. If you pull that and throw this, he said, gesturing to the reroute switch, we will have to live with a slight sag for a second, then it will catch. The breakers are labeled, and the lockouts are in the orange bin. Rivera made me recite back the sequence before we did it. We executed the transfer like we were placing glassware on a shelf. The lights on the panel dipped and steadied. The control room reported that Delta's internal lights had gone out as planned, but the locks and environmental controls remained powered through the isolated bus. The public address speakers did not have power in the pod any longer. The voice would have to come another way. When we returned to Delta, Pagano hadn't moved. He had the towel in his hand like a mechanic ready to put his shoulder to a panel. Nothing has changed, he said. I heard the speakers try and fail. I heard the ventilation register click. The brace is steady. We stood together and listened. In the quiet, I could hear the building again. The fan bearings, the slight shift of the elevator cable. Someone far off walking on metal grating. I breathed, counted, and let my head settle to the list of tasks. I checked the lock indicator with the tester again. It read engaged. Rivera checked the air pressure delta. It was where it should be. We all wrote something in our notebooks because writing was a way to keep your hands from opening doors. The rest of the night came in small waves. The generator temperatures stabilized as the dust storm outside moved off to the east. The control room slowly regained cameras, though not all. The south cable chase detector cleared. The public address remained unreliable, so we stayed on radios with challenge and response. There was one more moment when a voice in the ventilation used a name I had not heard since childhood, the one my grandfather called me, and for that I put the earplugs back in without being told. The urge to answer passed like a muscle spasm. By 2:45 a.m., the incident had a shape. Power anomaly due to dust intrusions and generator stress, false fire input, communications interference with unknown vector, and a single lock state anomaly in delta that we had corrected mechanically and electrically. We were not going to open D2 during the event. The rule said do not enter without direct orders. No one was going to give those orders tonight. We would sleep in shifts in the chairs of the control room if we had to, heads back, radios on our chests, wake to the soft chirp of a status change. When the day shift arrived, eyes bright from too much coffee and the knowledge that they had missed the event but would be doing the paperwork, Rivera handed the incident binder to the incoming captain, a compact woman named Singh with a precise voice. Singh listened to the summary, asked 2 questions that were more like confirmations, no injury, no breach, and then looked at me directly. "What did it say that made you want to open a door?" she asked. "It used a word from my past in a voice I knew," I said. "It did not say anything new, it repeated. It tried to make the path of least resistance feel like compliance." "Good," she said. "Write that down exactly, not because it will help you next time, because it will help the person who has their first night next month." I slept after the debrief in the small housing unit above ground, in a room with a window that looked west toward a strip of mountains. The window was bolted and had a steel roll-down shutter in the wall that we only used when we were away. I left the shutter up and the curtains drawn. I needed the daylight. I woke up because the air conditioner kicked, the familiar thump and drone, and for a second I was back in the corridor listening for voices. The day was clear. The sky was a hard blue that made shadows sharp. On the shelf, my radio sat on its charger like something tame. Shift schedules kept rolling. The following evening, the facility felt normal again in the way that a tightly run place restores itself. We replaced the panel in the generator room. Maintenance vacuumed the fine dust out of the south chase. Information technology personnel examined the logs and could not find a point of entry that fit the pattern. The audio anomalies remained unexplained. The technicians did not call it interference. They called it non-standard input, which was their way of being honest and keeping their jobs. I asked Rivera, in the neutral place near the coffee machine, how long she planned to stay in a job like this. She stared into her cup and said, "Long enough to leave on my terms." I understood. This was the sort of place that could take your seasons from you if you let it. You could start in spring and look up to find that the desert had flipped from summer to winter and back without you noticing. 2 nights later, the facility decided to test the correction we had made without asking us. At 9:02 p.m., the Delta door indicators did a brief dance, blue to green to blue, and the public address in the pod attempted to wake. It failed. The brace we had installed held, but a vibration shivered through the door in a way I felt through my palm when I had it there to test the seal. The camera inside D2 came back for a single frame that showed the bed with a slight wrinkle in the sheet that had not been there. Then the feed dropped again. The keycards on the table were gone. We logged it. We adjusted the brace just enough to tighten it another fraction of an inch. We did not loosen anything. We did not open anything. The rules were not about fear. They were about discipline. I said that to myself. I said it again when, around midnight, the voice in the ventilation said my first name with an inflection that made it into a question. The seasons turned overhead. Monsoon storms brought brief pools of water to the arroyo behind the ground building. In the fall, the wind came sharp and made the antenna sing. I learned the shift change rituals. The off-going team wrote notes to the oncoming team about coffee filters and sticky badge readers in handwriting that betrayed their personality. I learned how to read the eyes of the clinicians when they had had a difficult session. I learned that the technicians who wore earplugs all night tended to sleep better. I began to do the same. Then we had a detainee transfer. Transfers were rare. They were planned a week in advance and rehearsed in daylight with the route marked on a map and every door test cycled. The new detainee came in under a tarped transport crate the size of a small car, lifted by a forklift into the freight elevator and then rolled on air casters down to Charlie. The placard said human origin confirmed, and then underneath, in a line that I had only seen once before, cognitive contagion potential, no verbal exchange. The crate had a small window, and through it I saw the outline of a person sitting straight-backed, hands on knees, looking directly ahead at something only he could see. The transfer went without incident. The door sealed. The indicators read blue, then green for secure, then blue again as the system cycled. We exhaled. The public address stayed quiet. The cameras stayed on. I was writing the time in my notebook when my radio spoke on a channel we did not use. "Shaw," it said, using a voice I did not recognize. "You promised." The word hung there, simple and without context. I froze. Rivera turned her head slightly. The operator in control said, with a little too much speed, "All stations, maintain channel discipline." My radio stayed quiet. That night, I could not settle. The corridors looked longer. The facility felt like a person holding their breath. I did my rounds methodically. In Bravo, the whisper under the floor had learned a new cadence. It sounded like conversation heard through a door, not because of words, but because of the rise and fall. In Charlie, the man who did not breathe blinked once. A slow act, and for the first time I thought of him as alive in a way I could not define. In Delta, the indicator for D2 stayed blue, and the brace just stood like a quiet fact. At 1:13 a.m., the power dipped. Only once, only briefly. I looked up at the ceiling like a person expects rain. The light steadied. The radio clicked. I said nothing. 10 minutes later, the control room called every post and asked for a verbal status with challenge and response. We provided it. They asked us to repeat it in reverse order. We did. Then, the operator asked me to go to the armory with another officer and verify the inventory by serial number. That was not a normal request at that hour. I went because the manual said you always verify the physical when the intangible is uncertain. The armory was cool and smelled like oil. The racks shone in the emergency lights that were always on in that room in case the power failed. We pulled weapons one by one, read serial numbers, and logged them. When we reached a carbine on the bottom rack, I saw that the audit seal on its trigger lock had a faint smear across the stamping. You only get that smear when someone takes a seal off and presses it back on. I checked the manifest. That carbine had not been signed out in weeks. I logged the smear. I photographed it with the armory camera that saved images to a secure drive. The other officer looked at me like he was trying to decide if he was relieved that I had noticed or wished that I had not. We reported it to the control room. Rivera arrived in 4 minutes, the time it took to walk from Delta without running. She checked the seal herself, said nothing, and then said, "We will inventory every round in this room. We will do it now." We stood at a metal table and counted ammunition by the light of a desk lamp, reading lot numbers, matching quantities. At the end, one box of frangible cartridges had 16 rounds missing. 20 sold as a box, 4 present. The missing 16 did not match any sign-out. We did not panic. We inventory locked the armory, applied fresh seals, and logged the incident. Rivera called the facility director at his quarters and gave him a calm briefing. He arrived in plain clothes, hair flattened on one side, and listened with his hands in his pockets. He said, "We will assume the rounds are on site. We will assume they are part of a test. We will run our test in return." The director's test was straightforward. Cross-check every sensor the system reported as healthy with a human verification. We divided the facility into zones. I took the air intakes with a maintenance tech named Kim, who carried a particle counter and an anemometer. We checked filter housings, looked for signs of tampering, confirmed that screws showed dust in their heads that would have been disturbed by a recent removal. In the corridor above Delta, the particle counter climbed as we approached the supply diffuser, then fell when we moved past. Kim tapped the housing gently with the handle of her screwdriver. It made a dull thunk. "Something on the interior," she said. "Maybe just an accumulation from the storm." We logged it for later cleaning. We did not open anything that was not part of the plan. When I walked away, the urge to look back at the diffuser came on hard, like a magnet behind the wall. I kept walking. By dawn, the incident report binder had a thickness to it. The paper had weight. The inventory discrepancy would require an external audit. The director told us to sleep, then to return for an afternoon meeting where we would review and propose additional controls. I showered in my room, let the hot water run over my head until the sound drowned the phantom hiss of the ventilation. I slept for 4 hours without dreaming, or if I dreamed, I did not remember. The meeting took place in the conference room with the glass walls that let you pretend you were still in the world. We proposed small changes. Physical braces installed permanently on certain doors, mechanical cutouts for pod speakers, weekly drills for manual power transfer, additional particle filters ahead of the detectors in the cable chases, and a standing order that all radios would be authenticated with challenge and response after any power event. Rivera added one more. Earplugs for all officers on duty, carried as part of the uniform, she said. Not as hearing protection, as choice protection. The director approved every item. I drove out one afternoon to the edge of the restricted area with a maintenance team to pick up shipments from a drop point. A small fenced yard where a delivery truck could unload without entering the annex. There is a point where the desert meets the road and looks like a painting because nothing moves. Then, all at once, a dust devil lifts and you remember the air is not empty. I stood there as the others loaded boxes labeled with inventory codes and watched a hawk wheel over the basin. It felt like a place where the ground keeps secrets because there's so much room. That night, my mother called and asked how I was. I told her that the work was steady and the food was decent and the people were good at their jobs. All of that was true. She said she had dreamed I was underground and trying to read a map without a flashlight. I told her to get some sleep and that I would call again on my day off. I hung up and sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the wall until the air conditioner kicked off and the silence made a shape around me. The next breach was not dramatic, it was methodical. It came 6 weeks later on a Tuesday when the incoming shift was light by one officer because of a stomach virus. It started with a message in the control room system log that no one typed. Review D2 Environmental. The letters appeared one by one, as if being pressed by an invisible hand. The operator took a screenshot, printed it, and locked it in a drawer. He did not click the message. He did not speak to it. He followed the rule we had written. Do not engage. He called the on-duty captain, Rivera, and they went to the terminal together. D2's environmental values were in the normal band. The pressure delta was within tolerance. The temperature read a steady 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The air exchanges matched the baseline. The only anomaly was a small ripple in the microphone input that should have been dead because we had the hardware cut off. The ripple came and went like a heartbeat. Rivera logged it, made the manual notation, and was about to walk away when the ripple changed to a straight line, then to a pattern, then to a pause. The pause looked like a person waiting to see if the other person would speak. We brought in a technician who specialized in signals. He had the look of a person who lives amid oscilloscopes and frequency analyzers, patient, with steady hands. He tapped the input line and frowned. "This is not audio," he said. "This is an electrical load variation pretending to be audio." He traced the line back to the power distribution for the pod and found a draw that did not correlate to any device we had. The draw fluctuated like a living thing. Small, regular, more pronounced when we stood nearby. We isolated D2 again. We cut power at a higher level. The draw persisted for 8 seconds after we pulled the breaker, then stopped. The technician wrote a number on the whiteboard that represented the total energy consumed by the unaccounted draw. It was small, but it was not zero. He circled it and put a time next to it, then drew a line for each minute it reappeared. The lines formed a pattern, a grid, then a diagonal, then a step. Rivera stood back and put her head on an angle. "It is learning what our attention looks like," she said softly. After that, the facility changed its posture without announcing it. The ground building began to look less like a water plant. New fencing went in that could be dropped flush with the sand if aerial imagery became a concern. Additional shielding went into the walls of Delta. The air ducts in that sector were fitted with manual knife gate dampers that an officer could throw with a lever to cut the path to the main trunk. We added a protocol that any mention of names over speakers would trigger an automatic page to every officer. Do not respond to names. Report position. Wait for eyes on. Through all of it, the detainees remained ordinary in their extraordinary ways. The man in Alpha pressed his palm to the glass and left no print. The outline in the corner of A5 hugged the ceiling and turned as if keeping watch over some invisible street. The whisper in Bravo drifted through vowels that refused to form words. The man in Charlie did not breathe and looked up only when the air temperature changed a degree. The cells were designed to be boxes, but in my head they became locations on a map I carried with me even topside. One night in late winter, the radio performed a small kindness. I was in the corridor near Delta when the operator called me in his normal voice with the right challenge and the right response. He asked me to verify the brace as part of the scheduled check. I rested my hand on the brace, felt its cool metal, and said on the air, "Brace is steady." The public address overhead crackled to life without power and said, in my grandfather's voice, "Strong boy," a thing he used to say after I carried groceries in from the car. I smiled without meaning to. Then I felt anger arrive, clean and bright, that the facility had allowed itself a space in my head to make that possible. I did not speak. I wrote the time. I wrote the words "strong boy" in the incident notes and drew a box around them so that the next officer would know we had seen it and still stood where we were supposed to stand. This is the part of the account where a dramatic breach should occur, where something breaks free and officers sprint down corridors and alarms turn red. That is not what happened. What happened is that we held the line by inches. We never opened D2. We never took a bargain. We never answered a name. We replaced panels. We cleaned dust. We counted rounds. We wrote things down. We trusted that the procedures we had been handed by people we would never meet had been written in the blood of mistakes we were not going to repeat. I still think about the keycards on the table in D2 that day. I think about the way the metal strips caught our headlamps, as if the light enjoyed being a message. I do not know how those cards arrived, or whether they were ever there at all. I know that I never lost my badge. I know that I still check it with my fingers when I step off the elevator to level -2. I know that when the public address crackles, I breathe once and avoid the first thought that leaps. People ask me, when they do not know what I do, whether my job is exciting. I tell them it is methodical, and that methodical is better. Excitement is a failure mode. This is a place where we do not chase stories. We check doors. We confirm pressure. We do not go into rooms we have no reason to enter. We do not believe voices that come from vents. We do not open doors with our names on them. In the evenings, on my days off, I drive out to a bluff where you can see the white sands in the distance like a silver sheet. The air is thin and the light goes gold on the edges of the scrub. I sit on the hood of my car and let the heat leave the metal through my jeans. A freight train will pass far away and sound like a breath through a throat. I think about the people in their houses, the kids doing homework, the cooks closing down their kitchens, the techs finishing a shift at a hospital. The world above is busy and noisy and alive. The place below is busy and quiet and alive in a way that demands we be steady. Both can be true. I stay because someone has to. Not because I believe the things in the cells are evil or because I think they want what is ours. I stay because we built a place to hold what cannot be held in any other way, and we made rules that keep the people who work there human. The rules are what matter. Do not speak to detainees. Do not step into a cell without orders and escort. Do not take any item offered. Do not accept a bargain. Do not answer to your name when it is not a person saying it. These rules sound simple until it is your name, and then you find out whether you are the person you hope you are. When the new officers arrive, we hand them earplugs with their radios and show them how to set the headlamp to the low setting so their pupils do not lock down. We walk them past Alpha, where a man will sometimes tap on the glass with a knuckle and then smile because you did not look. We walk them past Bravo, where the whisper will say weather it cannot feel. We walk them past Charlie, where the man who does not breathe will blink once if you breathe shallow as you pass. We stop outside Delta. We place a hand on the brace. We tell them that here, more than anywhere else, they must trust the boring rule. We ask them to repeat it. If a detainee uses your first name, you do not answer. If a voice offers you a deal, you do not answer. If a door looks like an invitation, you do not answer. The desert teaches you to live by small measurements. A quarter inch of rain, 5 minutes before dawn, one notch of shade that moves like a sundial across a concrete pad. The facility teaches the same lesson in another language. We count amperage and pressure deltas and door latch times. We mark down the seconds a voice waited between phrases. We take an extra step back before a corner in case someone wants us to hurry. We leave with the sun coming up and sleep the sleep of people who have been awake for the right reasons. On my last check before the end of shift tonight, I walked past Delta and saw my reflection in the polarized glass of D2. Just a small, faint figure in a washed-out square. Behind me, the corridor light flickered and steadied. I stood there and listened. The air vent above my head made a soft noise like a page turning. No voice spoke. The brace did not move. The indicator stayed blue. I touched the metal with the towel and pressed, just enough to feel the door answer back with its weight. Then I logged my position, the time, 11:57 p.m., and the words, "Status unchanged." I took the elevator up when the relief arrived. The sun was not yet up, but the sky was gray with the kind of light that suggests a clear morning. I stepped out into the desert air and smelled dust and sage. The antenna on the roof hummed. In my pocket, the earplugs were warm from my hand. My radio chirped once like a small bird. I drove out past the fence that says it belongs to a water plant and turned onto the road that meets the highway like any other road. The world did not know I was coming. That is the point. Tomorrow, the logs will be reviewed. Someone will read my handwriting and understand where I stood and for how long. They will note that I did not open a door that was not mine to open, and that I returned the hands-on kit with every tool accounted for and the small crowbar wiped clean. They will see that I wrote down the one sentence the speaker offered and that I did not answer. And the people above will go on with their lives, not because of me, but because we keep the things that should not exist in rooms built by people who know how to follow instructions. That is the work. That is enough. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.